The room reeked of overconfidence, that particular brand of cocky energy only found in military recruits fresh out of orientation, eager to prove themselves loud when silence was smarter, and always ready to laugh at what they didn't understand. It started with a tattoo, a small purple triangle inked just below the collar of a woman's training shirt. Barely visible, easily overlooked. "Hey, check it out," Private Eric Mason snorted, elbowing the recruit next to him. "Is that a triangle or some kind of anime thing?" "No way." Another chimed in. "Looks like one of those empowerment patches my niece wears to those dance meetups. What'd she call it? Tattoo Violet or something. Probably from a mall parlor. Cute though," Mason added, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet it means something deep like sisterhood and sparkles." The woman in question didn't flinch. She was compact, no more than 5'4", maybe in her early 30s, with tightly tied dark hair and a quietness that didn't quite match the noise around her. She knelt, calmly folding her PT gear, cinching her boots, and tucking away her gloves with a precision no one bothered to notice. Her name was Lauren Bishop, but none of the recruits knew that yet. They didn't ask. She wore standard, issue training attire, no rank, no patch, nothing that would earn her a second glance. To the group of over-eager young men in the room, she was just background. A supply tech maybe, logistics. One of those support staff types who kept things moving but didn't matter much on the front line. And so the laughter continued. "She gonna cry or something?" One whispered. "Looks like we hurt her feelings. She's not even saying anything. What doesn't speak English? Or maybe she thinks she's better than us." Lauren kept her head down, fastening her gear bag, her every movement efficient and unhurried. The kind of muscle memory that doesn't come from training manuals, but from years of doing something the right way, because the cost of doing it wrong had once been far too high. But the boys didn't see that. They saw silence, so they assumed weakness. They saw a small woman with a purple tattoo and thought, safe target. Private Mason, emboldened by the chuckles around him, raised his voice. "Hey Grandma, we're all dying to know. What's the story with your cute little ink? Pick that off Pinterest or something." Still nothing from Lauren. She reached for the door, her steps nearly soundless. The kind of silence that only comes from people who've been trained to move without being noticed. And then the door opened. Colonel Richard Halvorson stepped in, every back straightened instinctively. The man had that effect, 30, 2 years of service, 2 Bronze Stars, and a stare that made men feel 10 pounds lighter from the soul alone. The kind of soldier who didn't just serve, but survived the kinds of things nobody put on official records. He scanned the room once, quickly, sharply, and stopped. Not on the mess of recruits, not on the scuffed training mats or scattered duffels. He stopped on her, specifically the tattoo behind her collar. The color drained from Mason's face. "Who just mentioned that tattoo?" Halvorson asked, voice low, steady, the kind of steady that made your gut twist. No one answered. No one dared. The colonel stepped forward, eyes fixed on the purple triangle. His expression shifted, like recognition had just pulled a curtain back in his mind. "That's not cute," he said, nearly a whisper. "That's a Tango Violet cipher." Mason blinked. "Sir, we were just—" "Shut it." Colonel Richard Halvorson didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The moment the word cipher left his lips, something shifted in the air. A drop in temperature, like the room itself realized it had crossed a line. Private Mason's face drained of color. The recruits who'd been laughing seconds earlier now stared at the floor, the wall, anything but the small woman with the purple triangle tattoo. Lauren Bishop didn't move. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, but her head tilted ever so slightly, just enough to acknowledge the man who had walked in. The colonel stepped forward again, slowly. His boots echoed across the concrete. No one in the room dared breathe too loud. "That symbol," he said, now facing the group, "does not come from a mall tattoo parlor, and it sure as hell isn't enemy stuff. That symbol belongs to a unit you weren't supposed to know existed." Silence dense. "Absolute." A young corporal near the back of the room finally croaked out, "Sir, with all due respect, I thought Tango Violet was just a rumor." Halvorson turned his gaze toward him, and that was answer enough. But he spoke anyway for clarity. It wasn't a rumor, he said. It was real, very real. Tango Violet was a deep reconnaissance and encryption unit. No ranks, no public records, no names, only symbols, codes, and mission designations. And that purple triangle, he gestured toward Lauren's neck. That's one of the rarest identifiers we ever authorized. Private Mason swallowed hard. Sir, we didn't know. It was just a joke. Halverson's stare cut through the air like a bayonet. You think because someone's quiet, because they don't boast or bark orders, that they're safe to mock. You think you can measure someone's worth by their voice or their build. Let me tell you something, Mason. That woman's got more operational hours in hostile territory than your entire training platoon combined. Lauren remained still, calm, but something about her posture had shifted. It wasn't defensive. It was centered, grounded, like a wire quietly pulled taut. You know why you've never heard of Tango Violet? Halverson asked. Because they weren't meant to be remembered. They weren't medals and ceremonies types. They were the ones who entered first, gathered what we needed, disrupted enemy networks, and left before anyone knew they were there. He paused, his voice lowering. And if they failed, no body retrieval, no rescue up, just silence. The kind that gets redacted twice. Now every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on Lauren. The recruits weren't smirking anymore. They were shrinking one by one into the weight of what they had just learned. Halvorsen looked directly at Lauren. Bishop, he said with a nod. TV-08, right? She met his gaze, her voice quiet but unwavering. Last assignment was Ghostlight Station, sir. After that, we weren't given discharge papers. Just told to disappear. You were never officially in, Halvorsen said. So no one had to officially let you out. One of the younger recruits near the door, the one who'd called her a mall tattoo grandma, suddenly seemed like he wanted to crawl under the floor. Lauren turned to him, her tone measured and surgical. You want to know what was offensive about your jokes? She asked. Nothing. The ink doesn't care. But your assumptions. That's where people get killed. She walked a few steps forward now, facing the whole group. Out there, she said, pointing toward the training field beyond the window. You don't get the luxury of misunderstanding a symbol. You don't get to laugh at something just because it looks unfamiliar. Out there, 1 second of doubt, 1 moment of misjudging the person next to you, and someone doesn't come home. Mason lowered his head. Mom, I didn't mean. Of course you didn't, she interrupted. But the enemy won't care what you meant. Neither will the guy whose blood is on your boots because you underestimated a teammate. Colonel Halvorsen stepped in again. You boys just learned something that normally takes years, or a war zone, to understand. Rank doesn't always wear stripes. Some of the most dangerous people you'll ever meet walk through the world like they don't exist. That's not weakness. That's design. He checked his watch, then looked back at Lauren. You've got a logistics briefing in 20. These recruits have PT in 15. She gave a single nod. As she turned to leave, she paused at the doorway, glanced over her shoulder, and left them with one last thought. The jokes didn't bother me, she said, but they taught me who in this room makes quick assumptions, and who might make those same mistakes when it actually counts. Then she walked out, quiet, steady, like a ghost who had chosen, just this once, to be seen. And not a single recruit in that room would ever look at a tattoo or a quiet woman the same way again. The door hadn't even closed behind Lauren Bishop before the room began to feel smaller. Colonel Halvorsen turned to face the group of recruits again, and this time no one met his gaze. The bravado had drained from every face. No more jokes, no sideways glances. Just a heavy stillness, the kind that followed a lesson too sharp to forget. You want the full truth, Halvorsen said at last. Fine. Let's talk about Tango Violet. He took a slow breath, not for effect, but as if deciding how much to say. It wasn't a unit in the way you're used to. No ranks, no battalion insignias, no files you could request. It was something else. They were built for one purpose: enter hostile zones, collect critical intel, and disappear before anyone even knew they'd been there. One of the quieter recruits, a young woman named Sarah Holt, raised her hand slowly. Sir, Are you saying there's no paperwork? No record of their missions? Halverson nodded. That was the whole point. If things went south, there could be no names to extract, no chain of command to point fingers. Each operative had one ID, a cipher burned into memory and eventually skin. He pointed to where Lauren's tattoo had been. TV's 08. That wasn't a nickname. It was her entire identity while inside that program. Tango Violet, designation 08. When she said Ghostlight Station, that wasn't code. That was real. One of the last forward operating posts they used before the unit was dissolved. Private Mason looked up, still pale. Dissolved. Why? Halverson's mouth pressed into a hard line. Official answer. Too expensive. Too indecountable. The kind of unit higher-ups can't control makes them nervous. Unofficial answer? He shrugged. They were too good at what they did. Too quiet, too clean. The kind of success that didn't need headlines. Just didn't fit the political optics anymore. He walked slowly across the training room, his boots methodical against the concrete. Make no mistake, Tango Violet operatives weren't some Hollywood spies running across rooftops with machine guns. They moved data, languages, communications. They could dismantle an enemy's ability to fight without firing a shot. The room remained dead silent. They could reroute troop movements using a single burst transmission, crash networks using only outdated frequencies. And if you're wondering how many lives they saved, he glanced around, then shook his head. You can't count casualties that never happened. Sarah Holt spoke again, this time softer. What happened to them? I mean after. Halvorsen looked toward the door where Lauren had exited. They got orders. Go home, blend in, disappear. No medals, no retirement, just silence, and the hope that nobody would ever need them again. He paused. But silence doesn't erase training. Doesn't erase instinct. And it sure as hell doesn't erase memory. The recruits looked toward each other now, realizing they hadn't just mocked a woman with a strange tattoo. They'd mocked someone who had once carried national secrets on her shoulders, alone, in the field, with no backup and no recognition. Someone who had survived things they couldn't even imagine, and never once told a soul about it. Private Mason finally found his voice again, low and strained. Sir, what kind of missions were they sent on? Halverson stared at him for a long beat, then answered without fanfare. The kind where failure meant an entire base might get overrun, where even a trace of your presence would compromise diplomatic negotiations or launch a retaliatory strike. Where one missed code, one wrong facial expression, could unravel years of planning. He tapped his temple. And if they made it back, they couldn't talk about it. Not even to their families. They came home with scars and no one was allowed to ask how they got them. The world moved on like they never existed. Sarah Holt spoke one last time, and Lauren, she really was one of them. Halvorsen nodded. She wasn't one of them. She was one of the best. She wasn't assigned to Tango Violet. She was Tango Violet. He paused again, letting the words sink in. TV 08 is not just a number. That cipher doesn't get handed out. You earn it. You survive things most people won't even believe happen. And then, if you're lucky, you get to come home and be forgotten. A long silence followed, not the awkward kind, the respectful kind, the kind born when young men and women realized they'd been standing in front of something monumental, and they'd almost laughed it out of the room. Halverson looked at each one of them, slowly. From now on, you look deeper. You pay attention. Because not everything that looks ordinary is harmless, and not every hero wears their story out loud. No one said a word. They didn't need to. Colonel Halverson let his words hang in the air for a long moment, as if daring anyone to speak. But no one did. Across the training room, the silence had shifted from uneasy to reverent. The recruits, so recently full of bravado, were now each locked in their own thoughts. Some stared at the floor, others at the wall, and a few couldn't help but glance back toward the door where Lauren Bishop had just exited. She hadn't said much. She hadn't needed to. And that, perhaps, was what made the impact so lasting. Finally, the door creaked open again. She was back. Not for drama, not for attention. She had simply forgotten her field notebook, the same one she always carried, tucked between rows of manuals and folded briefs. Her fingers found it easily on the bench, But she didn't leave right away. She turned to face the room. It wasn't anger in her eyes. That would have been easy to dismiss. No, what she carried was something deeper, quieter, sharper than any reprimand. Disappointment. "I'm not here to make a point," she said, voice calm. "But I'll say something now, since no one's sure how to fill the silence." No one moved. "You thought you were making jokes," she continued. "You saw a symbol you didn't understand and turned it into a punchline. You didn't ask what it meant. You didn't think to wonder if there was a reason I wore it. You saw something different, and you labeled it before you even blinked." Private Mason's eyes dropped again. His throat bobbed, but he said nothing. "Let me be clear," Lauren said. "The jokes didn't hurt me, but they taught me something." She took a small step forward. "They taught me how quickly people can judge what they don't understand. How easily they'll assign meaning to something just because it doesn't fit the world they know. Out there," she gestured toward the field, "that kind of thinking gets people killed." Her voice didn't rise. In fact, the quieter she spoke, the more every word cut. "In the field, we don't get time for second guesses. If you mistake a signal, misread a tone, ignore a pattern, because it looks harmless, someone doesn't come home." She looked directly at Mason. "You thought I was a supply tech with a cute tattoo. Someone you didn't have to respect. That was your mistake." Mason's face had turned a deep red. Not from shame alone, but from understanding the weight of what he'd missed. Then Halvorsen stepped beside her, folding his arms. "She's right," he said. "And here's your reality." He turned to the room. "You just mocked someone with more real, world combat exposure than this entire training unit combined. You laughed at a symbol that has survived missions you'll never read about. You saw quiet, and you mistook it for weakness. And that's the kind of mistake that doesn't get a second chance in the field." One of the younger recruits near the back lifted a hesitant hand. "Sir, are we allowed to ask what she did? Like what kind of operations?" Lauren responded before the colonel could. "No," she said simply, "you're not." There was no bite in her tone, just truth. "That's not how this works. The missions I was part of didn't come with plaques or speeches. The success of our work was measured by silence. If things went right, no one ever knew we were there." She tapped the edge of her notebook against her palm, as if weighing her next words. "The problem with stories like mine is that they don't get told in classrooms, or briefing rooms, or war memorials. They live in quiet corners of memory, in scars no one's allowed to ask about, and sometimes in little purple tattoos people mistake for decoration." Her eyes swept across the group again. "You don't have to fear me. I'm not here to impress anyone. But you should remember this." She pointed to her chest. "In this uniform, respect isn't optional. It's mission critical. Not just for rank or service history, but because the person next to you may carry a piece of your survival, whether you realize it or not." For a moment, no one even shifted in their seats. Then, unexpectedly, Mason stood. Not tall, not proud, but sincerely. "Mom," he said, voice unsteady. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Lauren looked at him. "Don't apologize for what you didn't know," she said. "But make damn sure you don't stay ignorant." She nodded once, turned, and this time truly left the room. Halvorsen watched her go, then addressed the group one final time. "She won't say it, but I will. TV-08 isn't just a cipher. It's a reminder that there are people in this world who protect everything we stand for and ask nothing in return." He stepped forward and looked directly into the faces of every recruit. "Learn from this," he said. "Because next time you won't be in a training room. You'll be out there. And out there, a wrong assumption doesn't cost you embarrassment. It costs lives." With that, he left them to sit in the silence they'd earned. And no one in that room ever forgot the day a soft, spoken woman with a quiet walk and a purple triangle taught them all what a warrior really looked like. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no formal apology, no announcement, no lineup of recruits shaking hands or pledging new respect. But something fundamental had changed in the days that followed Lauren Bishop's quiet confrontation. She still walked the same corridors in the training compound, still wore her standard issue gear, still kept her voice low and her manner reserved. But now when she passed, people stood a little straighter. Eyes didn't dart away in disinterest anymore. They lingered, searching, curious but cautious. She hadn't become a legend. She'd become something rarer, a quiet authority. Private Mason, who'd once joked about her tattoo, now gave her a respectful nod each time they crossed paths. No sarcasm, no overcompensation. Just a man who had been humbled, and who now recognized value where he'd once seen nothing at all. And it wasn't just him. Late one afternoon, while Lauren was checking inventory in the field med kit locker, a young recruit named Caleb Walker stepped forward with hesitation written across his face. "Ma'am," he said, holding a rolled bandage in one hand. "Can I ask you something medical?" Lauren looked up from the clipboard in her hands. What's the fastest way to stop a deep bleed if the tourniquet's not enough? There was no preamble, no bravado, just the unvarnished voice of someone who realized they didn't know as much as they thought, and had decided to do something about it. She set her pen down calmly. "You use compression and elevation," she said. "2 knuckles of pressure. Palm down, lean your weight into it. And if you don't have gauze, use what you have: shirt, towel, even your own sleeve if you must." Caleb nodded, scribbling it down on the edge of his notebook like it was gospel. Later that week, another recruit, a quiet girl named April Monroe, approached her during a break in field training. "Ma'am, if someone goes into shock, what's the first thing you do?" Lauren didn't hesitate. "Feet up, loosen clothing. Keep them warm, but don't overheat. Talk to them calmly. If their mind drifts, your voice has to anchor them. Not loud, just steady." April didn't write it down. She just memorized every word. The questions kept coming, slowly at first, then steadily, but never in groups. Always one on one, always with sincerity. The recruits had begun to understand that while Lauren wasn't there to give speeches, what she knew had been earned the hard way. And when she spoke, it wasn't to impress, it was to prepare. In a facility built around drills and doctrine, she became something else entirely. A compass. Not a commanding presence, but a grounding one. The kind you looked for when the wind picked up and the mission started to go sideways. She never boasted, never referenced her past. If anything, she deflected questions that drifted too close to the old operations. But when a recruit needed to know how to calm their breathing during live fire drills, or how to assess a wounded comrade while still under threat, she answered with clean, surgical clarity. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the motor pool and the last of the training rotations finished, Lauren sat on a bench near the comms tent, reviewing repair logs. A young medic, new, barely through his second month, approached with tentative footsteps. "Mom, I hope I'm not interrupting." She looked up, nodding once. I wanted to ask, you ever save someone? I mean, in the field?" She didn't smile, not at first. She looked past him, as if gauging how much truth he could carry. "The kind of work I did," she said slowly, "meant that the people I helped usually never saw my face. If I did my job right, they never even knew I was there." The medic nodded, not quite understanding. "But you did save people, right?" Lauren's voice softened. "I prevented situations that would have required saving. It's not always about dragging someone out of the fire. Sometimes it's making sure the fire never reaches them in the first place." The medic let out a quiet breath. "That sounds lonely." This time, she did smile. A small, faint curve that held something older than words. It was, but it mattered. Because someone got to see their family again. Got to eat breakfast the next morning, walk their dog, hold their kid, without ever realizing how close they came to never doing it again. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. From that day forward, word began to spread, quietly, like most things surrounding her. If something didn't feel right during training, ask Bishop. If you wanted to know how to move unseen, how to focus under pressure, how to think when everything around you screamed react, go to her. She wasn't in the chain of command, but slowly, unmistakably, she had become part of the backbone. Not a ghost anymore, not forgotten, but chosen by a new generation to be remembered not for what she once was, but for what she quietly continued to give. It happened during a gear inspection. Nothing dramatic, no tension in the air, Just the regular routine of cleaning, checking straps, oiling metal, and calling out serial numbers. Lauren Bishop was kneeling by the medic crate, restocking Gauls rolls, when Private Sarah Holt finally worked up the nerve to ask the question that had been lingering for days. "Mom," she said, keeping her voice respectful but clear, "can I ask something a little personal?" Lauren glanced up from the clipboard in her lap, eyebrows slightly raised. "I guess that depends on the question." Sarah hesitated, fidgeting with the edge of her glove. "It's about the tattoo. That triangle on your neck." Lauren didn't blink. She just nodded once, as if she'd been waiting for someone to ask. Really ask. Instead of laugh or whisper about it. "You want to know why I still wear it?" "Yes, ma'am. I mean, if it's part of a classified unit, wouldn't it make more sense to have it covered? Or even removed?" There was no offense in her tone, just genuine curiosity. And because of that, Lauren answered, "It was never meant to be removed," she said quietly. "Or hidden." She stood and dusted off her knees, walking toward the edge of the training yard where the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the dirt. Sarah followed, staying a step behind. "There are marks we carry that we're told to hide," Lauren continued. "Scars, mistakes, things we regret. And then there are marks we choose to carry, even when no one else understands them. That tattoo is one of the latter." Sarah looked at the triangle again, now visible in the light, small, clean, sharp. It almost looked decorative. Almost. "But most people don't even know what it means," she said. "That's the point," Lauren replied. "It's not for most people. It's for the ones who do know. And more importantly, it's for me." She paused, then turned fully to face the younger woman. "You ever look in the mirror and need to remind yourself who you are? Not for anyone else, but because the world keeps trying to make you forget." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's what this does," Lauren said, tapping the base of her neck. "It reminds me of the things I've done. The ones I can't talk about. The friends who didn't make it back. The missions that didn't end the way they were supposed to. It keeps me accountable." Sarah was silent for a moment. "I guess I just thought maybe you'd want to leave that all behind." Lauren smiled softly. "I did leave the missions behind. I left the danger, the code names, the redacted files. But I can't leave behind who I became because of them. And honestly, I don't want to." She stepped forward and pointed toward a row of new recruits, jogging the perimeter of the training yard. "Some of them will see things they'll never unsee. They'll carry lost silence, things they don't have words for. And one day when they're older, maybe one of them will see a mark like mine and realize they're not alone." Sarah looked down, then back at her. "So it's not just a tattoo. It's a signal." "Exactly," Lauren said. "A quiet signal. Not for ego, not for display, just a message for those who've walked the same road, and for those who never want to forget it exists." She paused for a breath. "We don't talk about memory enough in this place. We train for what's ahead. We prepare for the fight. But we don't always talk about what we're carrying when we come back. That triangle, it's not decoration. It's not nostalgia. It's memory, made permanent." The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of oil and sun, warmed canvas across the compound. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah asked, almost in a whisper, "Did they ever try to make you remove it?" Lauren nodded. "More than once. Right after Tango Violet was dissolved, I was offered a clean slate, a new identity, even laser removal." She looked Sarah squarely in the eye. "I refused." "Why?" "Because someone needed to remember. Because someone always needs to remember." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the concrete and dust, Sarah finally understood. It wasn't just about pride or defiance. It was about legacy, not the kind carved into metals or shouted at ceremonies, but the kind you carry in silence, through years of routine, through thousands of unspoken moments. The kind that keeps others alive even when no one knows it. The triangle wasn't about glory. It was about truth. And sometimes, even when the world tries to erase it, truth needs to be left visible, even if no one understands why. It was a few days after that quiet conversation by the field crates when the tattoo came up again. This time, it wasn't mocked. It wasn't misunderstood. It was simply noticed. One of the junior instructors, a former Marine turned field trainer named Greg Tully, had been observing from a distance. He'd seen the change in the recruits, the way they stopped treating Lauren Bishop like a background figure and started treating her like something closer to a living archive. He hadn't interfered, not his style, but one afternoon, after weapons maintenance, he caught up to her outside the armory. "You know," he said, "I used to think it was just a triangle, some kind of quirky ink from a younger, wilder year." Lauren didn't stop coiling her sling. "You're not alone in that." Tully scratched his beard. "But it's not, and I should have known better." Lauren finally looked up. "Most people don't. That's the design." He nodded slowly. "But you left it visible anyway?" She gave a half smile. "Not for decoration, and not to impress anyone. It's a scar that's easier to look at than the ones you can't see." He didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked out across the yard, where two young recruits were helping each other disassemble a comms unit. They moved with care, not speed, but attention. "You ever wonder," Tully asked, "how many ghosts we've met over the years without even realizing it?" Lauren gave the quietest of laughs. "All the time." And then, with nothing more said, she picked up her gear and walked away. That was how she moved through the world, never demanding recognition, never correcting the record, just existing, a thread in a fabric no one else could see. But for those who paid attention, the message was there. The recruits had begun calling her Mom without irony. When they asked questions now, they did it the way soldiers ask their last radio check before going dark, with full attention. No jokes, no assumptions, just the weight of needing the right answer. One of them, Holt, the quiet one, had started wearing a small purple thread around her wrist. It wasn't uniform regulation, but no one said a word, not after what they'd seen. And it wasn't about hero worship. It wasn't even about awe. It was about awareness. They'd learned something you couldn't find in manuals, something no simulation could teach, that sometimes the person doing the least talking in the room has already survived more than the rest combined. That sometimes the most ordinary looking scar holds the most extraordinary story, and that sometimes, just sometimes, silence isn't emptiness. It's evidence. They saw it in the way Lauren held herself, in the way she listened more than she spoke, in the way she could move through chaos like she'd already rehearsed it 100 times. Because she had. Just not here. Not where anyone had ever seen it. What looked like cute ink, to some had turned out to be a battlefield credential. It wasn't just a mark of service. It was a mark of survival. A signal from missions that never made the news. From places that didn't exist on maps. From assignments where success meant no one would ever know you were there, and failure meant you didn't come back at all. That triangle, it was a memorial and a warning, a reminder that not all sacrifices are made with headlines. Some are made in silence, under false names, behind locked doors, beneath signals no one outside the program could read. But now Lauren wasn't a ghost anymore. She was something rarer. She was a keeper of truth. Not the kind you shout. The kind you show, just enough for the right people to understand. And for everyone else, they didn't need to understand. They just needed to respect what they couldn't see. Because this story, this lesson, wasn't really about classified units or secret missions. It wasn't even about Lauren. It was about how quickly we forget that the quietest person in the room may be the one whose held lives in their hands. The one who has bled for peace. The one who still stands, not to be celebrated, but so others can stand next to them and not fall. And in the end, that was the lesson she left behind. That humility is not the absence of power. It's the refusal to use it for recognition. And that respect isn't earned by the volume of one's voice, but by the weight of what they've carried in silence. We live in a world that teaches us to look for credentials, uniforms, titles, medals, sommets. We're trained, often without realizing it, to assign value based on what we see. But sometimes, the most extraordinary stories are worn in silence. Lauren Bishop was overlooked because she didn't advertise her past. Because her strength wasn't loud. Because her tattoo, a simple purple triangle, didn't look like military service. But it was. It was a mark from a unit that didn't exist on paper. A unit whose operatives were trained to vanish before anyone saw them. A unit whose success was measured not by parades, but by the absence of disaster, and the lesson she left behind. Don't assume silence means weakness. Don't assume soft-spoken means unproven. And never, ever assume you know someone's story just by looking at them. Some people carry their battles where no one can see. Some carry their scars beneath plain sleeves. And some carry marks like that triangle, not for the world to admire, but to remind themselves why they're still here and who didn't make it back. So next time you pass someone who seems ordinary, the janitor, the driver, the quiet woman in line at the grocery store, ask yourself, what haven't I seen? What haven't I asked? Because the people we overlook may be the ones who kept us safe all along. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be far more than they appeared? Share their story in the comments. We'd love to honor them here. And if you believe we need more stories like this, stories of quiet heroes, of hard-earned respect, of lessons we almost missed, hit that subscribe button. Let's make sure these people are never forgotten again.